My name is Suzanne Anker, and I am the chair of the BFA Fine Arts Department at the School of Visual Arts. Many of you know me, some of you may not know me. And I have the great honor tonight of introducing our visiting artist, Ilana Harris-Babou, who currently is in an important exhibition at the Queen's Museum. And it's called After the Plaster Foundation. And it is based on the way in which real estate, particularly in Soho, was transformed from a bohemia into a kind of financial paradise. And her work deals a lot with consumer culture. She uses a lot of humor in her work and points to the contradictions in the American dream. Her work has been shown both nationally and internationally in museums and galleries around the world, most particularly here in New York at the Whitney and the Jewish Museum and the Museum of Art and Design and the Studio Museum in Harlem. She is also on our faculty now. She will be teaching one of our 7-week senior workshops. So many of you will have a chance to work with her directly. She comes from an august set of institutions where she had studied. She has a BA degree in art from Yale University, as well as an MFA in art from Columbia University. So please join us in welcoming Ilana Harris-Babou.
Hello, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm really honored to be able to share my work with you all today. And I'm also just super excited to get to know some of you all's work better this coming term in the senior workshop class. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you now. I thought I'd start off by showing you some of my work from undergrad since we're in a BFA program, just putting it all out there. Basically, to sum it up, my practice is interdisciplinary and it kind of spans sculpture and installation, but it's grounded in video. And when I was an undergrad, I was like Suzanne mentioned, I got a BA, so I didn't get a BFA. I wasn't in art school, but I did major in art at Yale. And at that time, I was a painting major because I kind of thought, you know, painting was real. That was what you did if you were really serious about majoring in art in my mind at the time. But I started to get really frustrated because I realized that there was only one moment in the life of a painting that was exciting to me. And that was kind of when it was still in a state of becoming. So when the paint was messy, when it was gloopy, when it hadn't dried yet, when I could feel things kind of coming together and then coming apart in my hands. And so I started to feel like the finished paintings that I was sharing with my classmates were sort of artifacts of what was really exciting to me about the process. And so that's kind of how I came to video. I just thought, why don't I share that moment with folks directly? Why don't I just turn my camera on that moment in the studio and see what happens? And when I first started editing videos, I had to look somewhere to figure out what my language would be, what like sort of my editing grammar would be when I was making my own videos and straight away, less so looking at film, I kind of started thinking about the things I was looking at on YouTube a lot, which at the time was music videos. And what became really exciting to me as like a person who is always really invested in materials and materiality and like a haptic experience was the way light transforms the surface of objects. So the way, you know, you could light almost anything at all beautifully and it seems delicious or seductive or enticing. And so I started to take that approach to the materials in my studio. And as I kind of moved forward, I started to kind of expand out in terms of what my references are. I'd say what I'm really interested in is what I like to call aspirational media. So things like music videos or cooking shows, home improvement television, these things where there's kind of like one host or character who lives this sort of perfect, idyllic life where they're sort of formed by the objects they're surrounded by. And I was looking at a whole bunch of cooking shows, and I was particularly looking at New York Times cooking and what was happening there. And so I got really obsessed with just the way, the kind of affect and the mode and the way these hosts would address the viewer, where they would kind of look directly into the camera and they'd say like, I'm you, or you're you, and I'm me, and today we're going to make salted caramel brownies. And within that kind of, there was like an assumption of a shared experience, a shared set of values, a shared set of interests between the host and the viewer. But obviously we all often feel a sense of dissonance. We don't have the things that that host has. And so when I decided to make my own cooking show, I was searching all over for what kinds of recipes I would use. And so I was reading cookbooks by artists. I was reading like the Futurist cookbook, Alice B. Toklas cookbook, reading more contemporary things, trying to find what words really stuck. And what really, at the same time, you know, I was in grad school, and so I had to read a lot of theory and other things like that. And I came upon a speech by Audre Lorde called The Uses of the Erotic as Power. And in it, there's a passage where she describes kneading a bag of margarine, which is an experience that was not familiar to me upon reading this. But she says, during World War II, we bought sealed plastic packets of white uncolored margarine, perched like a topaz just inside the clear skin of the bag. We would leave the margarine out for a while to soften, and then, taking it carefully between our fingers, we would pinch the little pellet, breaking it inside the bag. And then she says that they would knead it carefully over and over until the whole pound bag of margarine was thoroughly colored yellow. And I was really kind of excited about this as a potential recipe. She says that she wants to see the erotic as such a kernel within herself. So when released, it would spread through all of her experience. And so I was really interested in this idea of an object as sort of like a proxy for the body. But I was also interested in the way this lens, the lens of eroticism, or being present in your body and being present in your physical experience, was a way to transform something that we would initially think of as a state of lack, you know, maybe lack of access to real butter, and instead having this sort of fake synthetic material, turning that perceived lack into a kind of a strength or a power, that it could be something she luxuriates in, right? This process of kneading, and just the sensuousness of the way she uses words. And so when I was making this piece, I was living in New York City in grad school, which is where I'm from originally. I'm from Brooklyn. And so my mom could visit my studio a lot. And she got really excited about this passage in the Lorde text too, because she had a lot of memories of doing this when she was a little girl. Except for her, she was living with my grandma in this mansion in Connecticut where my grandma was the maid, and they shared a room, and it was kind of the kids' job every day to knead the margarine. And my mom found it this really messy, tactile, wonderful experience. And I saw that generational resonance, and that resonance of like a space of power was really interesting to me, right? Because we could think of that situation as a situation of lack as well, right? Like lack of childhood playtime, right? Lack of space to be a kid. But instead, my mom sort of turned that into an experience of play. So I'm going to play some of this video for you. Apologies for the noise there. I was mentioning before that folks do like drag races on my block, so that's what's going on. So the uses of the erotic from 2016. I'll play a few minutes for you.
Welcome to the cooking show today.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Now, there are many kinds of power, both those used and unused, acknowledged and otherwise.
The erotic is a resource that lies within each one of us and comes from a very deep female and spiritual plane.
Rooted in the power that comes from our unexpressed and unrecognized feeling.
The power that comes from sharing deeply with another person forms a bridge between the sharers.
We'll be building, we'll be cooking, and we'll be having a great time.
Stay tuned. We have something great coming up next.
Now, how many people can say that they truly love their work?
One perfect meal requires originality and harmony in the table setting. I'm going to create my structures by using my nails and hammers and screws, putting them in place. I'm going to measure off my wood, my plywood, and create my base for my island. After I have the island structure, I feel I can work from that point on. First, I get my drywall and I lay it out. And I make the drill holes. And then I get my limes and I cut my limes all over the drywall.
Now, don't forget, every dish should be preceded by a perfume, which will be driven from the table with the help of electric fans. Stay tuned.
It's smoothie time.
All right, so that video, the total runtime is about 11 minutes, and you could probably tell it's a 2-channel video. So originally it was installed in this setup that I'm showing you here, which was made out of the set that I actually shot the video in, and then I kind of repainted everything cream. And I think it's a really important part of my practice is that whenever I'm kind of making a video, I'm also imagining the initial space that I'm going to show it in and the context and the materials that are going to be around it. In this case, it was really important to me that the scale of like my body when I'm on the screen is kind of similar to that of the viewers when they're sort of sitting there watching the video, that there's this kind of one-to-one or almost eye level or something between us. And I started making these kinds of ceramic objects, these props that would be in my videos. Here I have a kind of a leaky sink that was in a countertop that in the back has like a popcorn and resin and pistachio. So a kind of a really textured surface that viewers could actually touch when they visited. And I started making these objects that I called dysfunctional ceramics. And so they were these kinds of, at first they existed just to be in the background of my videos, but as I started working, they kind of took on a life of their own. And so oftentimes now I'll show them along with the videos, but I like to think of them as maybe a distortion of like how would a 3-foot spatula change the way you relate to flipping a pancake? A kind of a similar relationship to my videos, in that my videos often take on a sort of familiar form and then make it a little bit strange. These objects do something similar. And I think about this familiar form as like a kind of Trojan horse. So it's kind of exists, the shininess, the sumptuousness of the music video form or the cooking show form exists to kind of get the work into the viewer's line of sight, right? That you catches your eye. And then once you kind of spend time with it, then the floodgates open and all the like weird stuff comes through. And so I started thinking about how these different spaces of creation are similar to or different from one another. So how is the kitchen with my grandma cooking pig's feet similar to or different from the sound stage with the cooking show host? How is that different from the sound stage with the rapper? And how is that different from, say, like a space like a man cave or these kinds of places where someone is making things? And most importantly, how is that similar to or different from the kind of tropes we have surrounding an artist in their studio, right? This genius kind of between white walls, like flinging around paint, usually male, right? Like which kinds of these ways of making do we find sacred or special or revered? And which ones do we find mundane or do we ignore? And so I was living in Virginia after I graduated from grad school, doing this fellowship at VCU called the Fountainhead Fellowship. And there I was staying, they give you this apartment that's kind of in this like fancy development complex as a part of the fellowship. And it is like in this building that's kind of owned by Ayn Rand fans. So that's why it's called Fountainhead, I learned later. But it was the first time there was like a TV that came with the apartment. It was the first time I had cable TV in a while. And it was also the first time I had ever lived alone. So I needed like sounds in my space. So I started just playing like HGTV, like Home and Garden television, sort of just, I would just leave it on while I was doing stuff in my apartment. And I got really interested in these kinds of home improvement shows and things like This Old House, and thinking about that host and the kind of making that they engage in. So I'll play some of this video. It's called Finishing a Raw Basement, and I initially made it for the basement of Sculpture Center in Queens. It was for maybe like individuals and institutions alike.
Welcome back. Today we're going to show you how to finish a raw basement, or unfinish it if you've gone too far. We'll be working in a great space, open concept, vaulted ceilings, and white to match the gallery upstairs. I brought along a friend to show us how. We're gonna have a great time. Great to see you.
It's good to be back. You know, a lot of us, we want to expose our raw bricks, but we're too shy to do it in public. I'm going to show you how to get it done in a few quick and simple steps.
Let's go down to the man cave.
Let's do it.
So language, or maybe what we would call scripts in my work. Where do I get the words that I use? Well, the answer is like I kind of get them from all over the place. So with this work, for instance, my mom and I are kind of saying things that, lines that are taken directly from episodes of This Old House on PBS, the home improvement show. Or they're taken from like home improvement or design catalogs. Or they're things that we say sort of just like ad-libbing. I'll play a little bit more.
So you can see, this is a great space. Open concept, vaulted ceilings, modern concept. It has that rustic appeal.
Classic.
Absolutely. I agree with you, absolutely. And
Modern.
transitional.
Mid-century.
So yeah, and we'll often just be in the space ad-libbing. I'll have an idea of what maybe is going to happen in the video, but I don't make like a storyboard or anything in that sense. What looks like a narrative or resembles narrative really sort of comes together for me in the editing process, which is like perhaps not the most efficient way of working. There are whole, you know, maybe weeks I've spent shooting something that didn't fit into the final product, but that's kind of it. And so I was doing I like to just kind of read something that I suspect will be relevant to the ideas that I'm thinking about, and just read it aloud in front of the camera and just kind of see how the words feel coming out of my mouth. And so in the context of this piece, like the word repair kind of kept coming up again and again. And I was thinking about what it means to really fix something. And that sort of transitioned into like me kind of looking at the space around me at the time, which was, it was during the last election. I was living in Virginia. I was living in Richmond, which was the former Confederate capital, you know, and so surrounded by these monuments that, and feeling like ever aware of the like nefarious sort of nature of nostalgia, right? And so I was thinking about like what it might mean to fix. And as my mom and I were talking about like having a lovely home, fixing a lovely home, repairing a lovely home, we started thinking about like who does and doesn't have access to home ownership. And so the word repairs kind of slid into the word reparations. And I started to imagine like what it could mean, or what we mean when we think we're making amends for something like the Civil War. At the same time, I was thinking about the kind of romantic nostalgia that was all around me. And so how that kind of makes its way into domestic space. And I had been looking at a lot of catalogs from the high-end design store Restoration Hardware. And their kind of thing is that they'll take materials from like old wood from old barns, and they'll sand it down and turn it into like a $3,000 table. And I was thinking about what is it about these things that makes people so attracted to them, these things where we know the provenance or the history, or at least the product claims it can tell you where it came from. And in a lot of ways I started to feel like maybe it's because you can bring history, or you can bring the past into your home, but you can bring it into your home sort of tastefully, right? And in so doing, you can kind of name the past as a success or something to look back on wistfully. And I was thinking about at the time, like, how come reparations are so terrifying for so many people? It felt even more true to me back then than now, hearing more folks actually bring this up, you know? When it was 2016, it felt muted, or felt like something that was really happening just inside of my head in that space. But I was thinking like, why are reparations so terrifying for so many people? Or why do they seem like a step too far? And in a lot of ways, it's because it says the past is not a success. It names the past as a failure. And not only does it name the past as a failure, it names the past as a failure in economic terms specifically. So a sort of a failure that the question to me was, is this something you can buy your way out of? And so I got really interested in another kind of character, which was the character inside of Restoration Hardware's kind of promotional videos when they come out with a new line of furniture. And in those videos, there's often like a designer standing in front of a bucolic landscape, talking in really vague terms about where they find inspiration. And I was thinking about that as like another sort of a genius creator. And so I started working on Reparation Hardware. And in this video, I'm imagining that, you know, we're launching a new line of furniture, but that line of furniture is in fact reparations for African Americans. So I'll play the whole thing.
There's nothing like old wood. It bears the marks of the passage of time. The new line will be a combination of every surface that's unresolved in the past and every space that's untapped in the present. Reparations will be our most ambitious project yet. We're going back to the source with rugged, splintery, slippery materials. I find inspiration everywhere, and I take this inspiration with me back to the studio. When designing the new line, I asked myself, how could these newly free individuals make a space for themselves that was both free of discrimination, tasteful, and refined?
Their liberation was handcrafted.
I follow the process from beginning to end. searching the landscape of our nation for its most authentic histories. We'll begin with the basics. When designing the space, we decided that each family would have no more than 40 acres of tillable land.
Engineered and made in the USA, they were built to exhausting standards.
Reparations. What is it? It's a way to give back a little. With reparations, you can take the past into your home tastefully. Truly dealing with how we live, recognizing one another's differences, is something that hasn't happened yet. Until now. There's still time to make it right and to get the space you deserve. We've earned the right to the soil many times over and over, and now we're determined to have it. There's no force like success, and that's why we've made every effort to surround ourselves with evidence of it. In the home and in the nation.
So when I installed this piece initially, again, I was kind of thinking about the space that it would go in from the time I started working on the video. I decided to make these kind of lamps. That the one in the middle is made out of these ceramic hammers that you see me using in the video. And I was thinking about this idea of the ceramic hammer being like a tool that would undo itself through its very use. So like wondering if the American project perhaps is a ceramic hammer of sorts at that time. And still, I guess, still wondering that. I was imagining a space that would look kind of like a furniture design store at first glance, but on second glance, you'd realize something strange was happening. And so I put these lamps on a table that was made out of wood from the barn that you see me in inside of the video. And I painted the walls this Benjamin Moore paint color called Plantation Tan, which again, I am so interested in how words shift when you put them in new contexts. And so the script that I have in that video, or the words, the voiceover, come from a whole range of sources. So Sherman's Field Orders, who was the Union general who proposed this idea of 40 acres and a mule. And then folks who are against the idea of reparations. And then we have like Henry Louis Gates, for example, is against reparations, or was, or 19th century Black homesteaders, or Marcus Garvey. So I'm kind of like saying that all at the same time as I'm saying language from the Restoration Hardware catalog that they used to promote furniture. And And so I wanted to share with you kind of how my videos also shift when I show them in different contexts. And so that's what's really exciting to me about making videos too, is that they can be kind of emissaries from the studio that I send out into the world. So maybe you never get to come into contact with the objects, but the video can kind of morph in different spaces, or it can just be inside of your iPhone. So like, last November, I got to show the video again, but this time in Richmond, which was where I thought of it in the first place. And I showed it at this kind of nighttime, like light-based and video art-based festival in a park called Chimborazo Park, which I didn't know the history of it at the time when I was living there, but it was initially a Confederate hospital during the Civil War. And then it was converted into one of the first freedmen's schools. So first schools for formerly enslaved people, and also kind of a living situation for them there. And so I constructed this sort of replica of one of the homes that folks would have lived in when that land was used for that purpose at the time, and sort of projected the video through that. And the video has changed a ton in lots of different places. Shared it in Australia, where the context is more thinking about what's owed to indigenous populations there, and showed it, yeah, in Germany, and what does that reckoning with history mean there? So that's been really exciting. But I'll just share with you, this kind of started like maybe like a 2.5 year obsession with this company, Restoration Hardware, that I didn't anticipate. But I made a video that I'll just play and talk over, called Red Source Book, that was also shown along with Restoration Hardware when I showed it, which is kind of me outlining the catalog of the store with red marker and Sharpie, while the text on the bottom is text that comes from the catalogs, like introductions, where the CEO will kind of quote Steve Jobs talking about ratcheting up our species through good design, with language from 1930s Federal Housing Authority guidelines for home lending. And so the practice that I was thinking about, or the practice that's kind of outlined in these documents, is one we call redlining, which was kind of instructing banks not to give home loans to communities where there was just one person of color, right? And so thinking about these red lines as these kinds of scars that were drawn around neighborhoods to where wealth was extracted, right? And so those would use all kinds of like coded language as well, like natural barriers keep out undesirable elements. In the same way, like when Restoration Hardware says, we hope you appreciate our efforts to curate the very best people, objects, and experiences the world has to offer, there's also a kind of coded taste in there. And so I'll just share with you how I kind of revisited this idea later. So this is at a space called 80 Washington Square East Galleries, which actually is not at 80 Washington Square East. It's on Broadway and East 10th in this NYU dorms. And so I made an installation that was in the kind of window display, kind of retail display on this really heavily trafficked, you know, retail artery. And I used catalogs from design stores that were in the neighborhood at the time, that I don't know if they're even still open now. And I combined that with texts from I found this old text where New York City paid this company to do research to figure out how much money it would cost the city to displace all of the people that lived in Lower Manhattan if they were to build the Lower Manhattan Expressway, which would have been a big highway, kind of like the BQE or the Crossbox Expressway, that would have kind of cut straight through Lower Manhattan. And so I was thinking really specifically again about place in this installation, and how thankfully the Lower Manhattan Expressway wasn't built because of organizing and protests and community involvement, but that displacement happened in other ways, right, through the kind of forming of retail and how that sort of shifted the landscape of the city. And so I I had the opportunity to again think about, I thought I was totally done thinking about this company. I was like so over it. But then I had the opportunity to make a new video for the Whitney Museum. And around the same time, I found out that Restoration Hardware was opening a huge like mega store right next to the museum, and also trying to open a hotel right across the street. And they had really fudged and pushed a lot of zoning laws of the neighborhood to be able to build these structures. And it seemed just like too perfect a confluence. So like from opening weekend, I started like sneaking around the store, shooting video of myself, like pretending to be the CEO amongst other things. And I noticed that they had a lot of like these objects all over the store, like African masks and Buddhas. And when you ask them where they came from, they would say, they're not for sale, but we send team members out across the globe to find these one-of-a-kind objects and bring them back to the store. And I had met an art historian named Christina Wilson, who writes about mid-century modern showrooms, which in the 50s also had African masks. And she talks about how they kind of put the other, these objects from the other, inside of these spaces, almost to like kind of affirm the whiteness of the furniture and its capacity to contain and hold the other and kind of control the other. And whilst also speaking to the taste and worldliness of the owner. So I'll play a little bit, I'll play the beginning of this video.
Our newest gallery is something truly amazing. You feel it from the moment you walk through the door. The most pleasing environments are a reflection of human design. A study in balance, symmetry, and perfect proportions. Design is a discipline of addition by subtraction, where less becomes more and calm is created through continuity. Our team members travel the world. They find one-of-a-kind objects and bring them back to our galleries. Design without the knowledge of its history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. I knew I had to find the source. I'll take you along with me on my journey. With precise geographic detail and clear-cut historical insights, we connect you to the places in the world where your story started. You know, good design has to be seen and experienced to be understood.
So this video, as you see, it's called Human Design, and I'm quoting a slogan that I saw like kind of emblazoned on the wall in the store, which was, "The most pleasing environments are a reflection of human design, a study in balance, symmetry, and perfect proportions." And so in this video, I kind of go out, pretend to be an explorer. I traveled to Senegal, which is where my father's from, to kind of find the origin of these objects. And it increasingly becomes confusing whether or not this character is finding these objects for the store or is trying to find herself. So some of the quotes come from Roots by Alex Haley, and some of them come from Ancestry.com, and some of them come from the store again. Some of them come from Heart of Darkness. So I'll just share with you last, like a kind of more recent set of ideas that I've been thinking about, which I became really interested in how the things I've been talking about with you all sort of play out in wellness culture, where again, they're, say like these Vogue videos where there's on their YouTube channel where there'll be a celebrity or a minor celebrity who'll take you through her like multi-step, maybe like 50-step beauty routine in front of a mirror. So in that space, she's kind of making something as well. She's making herself up. But I was thinking about like how, if we're thinking about authenticity and origin in the earlier work in human design, again, that becomes fetishized in wellness culture, right? Where we want to know exactly where this rose petal for the oil came from and things like that. Whilst also thinking about this linguistic obsession with things like clean eating. I found this magazine in the Hamptons which is like a Hampton specific wellness magazine called Purist, where they have their pure pics. So this kind of stripping off again. And so I made this kind of imaginary wellness store using colors kind of based off like the Glossier store and the Goop store. And I imagined this world where like we've come kind of we've circled back and now we love toxic things. So like car air freshener soap or Cheeto face serum. These things that maybe like taking things almost too far to the point where they're a bit grotesque. So like these kind of bars that are made out of face rollers. And so I made a video with my mom where she's kind of doing a beauty tutorial called Decision Fatigue, where she's taking you through her routine for a series of hypothetical events and scenarios. And more I'm thinking about these things also in terms of like a kind of a running away from mortality or something like that as well, and who gets to be well, who gets to feel well, and who doesn't, and what does care really look like in various contexts and for various people. So I'll play an excerpt of that for you.
When you breastfeed, your life force is drained from you. It's drained. It's being taken away. It's metaphysical, in fact. Eventually, I've been told that it doesn't cause that much of a physical reaction on your part in terms of pain, but my personal experiences have been to the contrary. Your breasts become very, very swollen and hard and tender. The nipples become crusted sometimes and they invert, and it causes for me a frustration that I just can't deal with it. Today I'll be showing you my daily beauty routine for eating a TV dinner. This is my rose quartz face roller, and I'm sure you've seen these around now. It seems to be very popular. Rolling your face before having a TV dinner is part of the relaxation process. Imagine you rolling and soothing your face, and you're winding down for the day, and then you have your TV dinner that you've just popped into the microwave or the oven that you haven't worked at preparing. Your face has been rolled out and relaxed, and now you can have your dinner and you can look at TV or the internet.
So this is the last video. This is the last thing I'll show you all. But it actually began as a spin-off of the piece that I made for this show that Susan mentioned. And it began as a video that is my mother sharing her daily beauty routine for a meeting with a real estate developer. So I was thinking in this context about the home that I grew up in, which I just live a couple blocks away from now, in Crown Heights. And the kind of, at the time, the crisis of deed theft in the neighborhood. So that's this kind of situation of predatory kind of home buying where they try to trick older homeowners out of the deeds to their home or get them to sell on less than ideal terms. And so my mom is kind of the prime target for that, like a senior citizen, single, older Black woman. And so they used to like call, leave notes on the door, handwritten notes, trying to persuade her to sell her house. And oftentimes there was like, it felt like almost a tinge of seduction in their mode of address. And so I got interested in my mom kind of thinking about how she would prepare herself and prepare her home for one of these visits. So almost like in that video, which hopefully if you get to go to the Queen's Museum, you can see it becomes this kind of like game of cat and mouse, like who exactly is trying to fool whom about appearances. So hopefully you can check it out. But that's all I'm going to share with you for now.
Well, thank you so much, Ilana. That was really quite spectacular. And I think there are just so many issues that you touched upon that are extremely relevant to what is happening in the world today. One thing that struck me really was the way you reckon with history. Okay, because it is not in a didactic way. It uses humor, it uses irony, it uses a formidable grammar of putting together the things that are often overlooked. Even when you talked about restoration hardware or reparation hardware, even the Whitney Museum's floor is made from wood that has been restored. So there's a kind of double-edged sword here in the sense that restoration is a form of recycling, but reparation is a very separate category. And I think that what also struck me was the intimacy of your relationship with your mother as a protagonist in your film. So can you talk a little bit more about why your mother appeared in so many of your videos?
Yeah, I'd say like I kind of like hate working with people in a lot of ways. I think I still am very much like, well, I'm thinking about this form of like the artist who's alone in their studio. It's like I'm an artist who like mostly wants to be alone in her studio. But I remember when I was in grad school, we heard Tara Birnbaum talk, and she was talking about what was so exciting to her in the 70s when video first became available as a tool to use in the studio. And she said that she could do a performance for which she was the first or primary audience, that she could replay the tape really quickly and look back at herself. And she mentioned thinking of this as like a sort of a feminist tool, so a way to kind of own or shape gaze. And that was really interesting to me. But in the aspect of my own work, it's usually me, the camera, and a remote. And I work with my mom or my family members in a lot of ways because she's sort of like the closest person to being me who isn't me. And also in the kind of very unprofessional way I deal with cameras and lighting, which is very improvisational, she's willing to put up with that. And making human design was like kind of a mess for me because obviously like I couldn't travel to Senegal and shoot everything on my own, especially because I don't speak Wolof, I don't speak French, so I had to hire a cameraman. And he was this like super judgy French man who's like, what is this? And I like was like, never again. But at least I gave it a try. I tried working with someone who wasn't my mom once.
Excellent, excellent. So Evan, do we have some questions?
We do, yes. So if you want to open the Q&A chat below you, we do have 3 questions. The first one I can start reading off.
Sure.
Your work is imbued with social commentary on multiple levels, but also there is a lot of humor threaded throughout your work. Where do you situate your humor as a component of your work? Do you think it's possible that humor might make light of some of the more serious issues that you are engaging the public with? You are doing great work, by the way, this person says.
Yeah, no, I don't think it might make light. I think that, I think of humor as sort of like the sugary coating on the outside of the Advil or something, right? It's like the thing that allows you to digest the medicine, right? Or take in the medicine, or the harsher realities or the more bitter realities that you really need to swallow. So for me, humor is kind of not even, I actually, in my process, I usually begin by trying to, like, in earnest mimic the thing I'm thinking about. I never do have an entirely external critical gaze. It's always something that I feel very much implicated within, you know, like I like to buy nice face scrubs and stuff like that. And so I think of it as like sort of a self-deprecation. And I had started feeling also like that space of self-deprecation is also a space of power, right? It almost like speaks of the stability of the self to be able to make light of. And I'm feeling so much often, especially as a Black artist, that we don't often get to be self-deprecating, that it is like seen as not our domain. And for me, it's like the space where I can just get to saying the things, the harsher realities, the more painful realities, in a way that feels true.
Great, and our next question is, have there been any comments from other artists, critics, etc., especially on your usage of quotes in your scripts directly from others? Have there been any specific praises, or on the contrary, any negative comments or claims of plagiarism?
Yeah, no, I've never gotten any criticism on that regard. I definitely was kind of paranoid when I started putting advertising images from the design stores that had the same images on the blocks nearby. Like, I thought they were definitely going to come for me. And there was one time when there was like a lot of hits on my website from like Restoration Hardware Network. And I was like, oh my God, they're lawyers. But no, I think if anything, right, they should like thank me, because they're probably people who've like went to see the thing and then we're like, oh honey, I didn't realize there was a store nearby or something, and bought like a couch. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know, the space of appropriation is like a space of homage, and yeah, I don't know, maybe one day someone will feel that way, but plagiarism definitely has never been a word that I've heard in relation to my work.
And our next one, do you find yourself doing extensive research on the history of your topics prior to diving into a piece?
I think I do it whilst diving into a piece, perhaps. Like I start making images, because oftentimes a piece for me is inspired by an object or an idea of an object first. So ceramic hammer, for example. And so that's like some kind of material way of knowing that happens. Whilst at the same time, I'm like reading a whole bunch of stuff. And so it goes like, I'm like shooting and researching at the same time. And I end up often going deeper and deeper into the words or library archives and stuff, while also doing this kind of more material research.
And one person is asking, how can a performance without an audience be called a performance?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, right, you make something for TikTok, you shoot it 1,000,000 times and you look at yourself over and over again, right? You're the critic, right? You're the audience, but you're also imagining within you, you're holding an audience of like an infinite scale, right? All the people who could possibly be seeing your TikTok video. So you have an audience that's your kind of imaginary audience, and it's yourself, just the way you see yourself. And so, yeah, I think that there is an audience, even when there's not another human in the room, especially nowadays, right? Because we like never get to be in the room with other humans. So we've had to accept that.
And our next one, can you discuss your work in terms of deconstruction? Do you see it in those terms?
No, I don't think so. I guess I see it as like a building upon, maybe, than a deconstructing, like a kind of adding an additive. It's more of an additive process, maybe, or one of multiplication. But that's me taking the word deconstruction on just the terms of what the word means to me at this moment in time. If you're referring to like some other kind of meaning of the word, then yeah, I don't know, you could elaborate.
Someone is saying your work is very inspiring. As another artist working with a family member from time to time, Do you and your mother share the same views in your projects?
Sometimes we do and sometimes not, I think. Like she definitely has gotten more and more involved as we're working. Like she'll definitely call me up sometimes and be like, I have an idea for something you should make a piece about. But I think she still wouldn't necessarily see it as her work or a collaboration in that sense, just in so much as maybe like your life is a collaboration with your parents' life or something, insofar as they formed it in many ways. So yeah, I like working with her. She's also just like a total ham, but she definitely wouldn't do anything she didn't want to do in the video. So she's having a ball. She has a lot better camera presence than I do personally, I think.
And our last question is, I love your use of language as a tool to reflect the world around you and also to reclaim and reshape it. Do you keep a log of words or phrases that interest you, or do you just have a mental file going?
I think I like have maybe like a Google Doc or something often where I start just kind of copying and pasting things in. Yeah, that's often where I'm storing things, maybe a little bit handwritten too.
Well, great. That was our last question for the night. So,
Was there something, what do you think of making your video work? Like a
one minute. Yeah. What do you think of making your video work like the faux ad for platforms like TikTok or Instagram? What are your thoughts?
Interesting. I've never seen an ad for those platforms, but I'm interested in seeing it and seeing what they do in those ads. And then seeing what could happen with it. But yeah, it hasn't come to mind yet. I also live next to a fire station, so that's what's going on now.
That person also said you should do it. Completely different audience.
I'll report back.
We're back.
Okay, that seems to be about it.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was really fun. Great questions.
This was great, and I hope that the students have taken a number of clues from you about how they can use irony even to deal with difficult subjects. So this is a great opportunity for us, and we will be hearing more from you, from your professional career, and as a faculty member here at the School of Visual Arts.
Yeah, I can't wait to learn from you all, from all of the students' work this fall. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, and stay safe and stay well.
Yeah.
So good night from SVA.